Well, Bill, we're live,
Yes. Hello,
and
hello, America.
let me tell you what: if there was, if they wanted to surveil us, it would take a lot.
Yeah,
FISA warrants. We're learning all about that.
yeah. Nunez is a traitor to America.
Yeah, it's so interesting though.
By the way, it won't even take long for Donald Trump is easily going to go down as the worst president.
That's very possible.
I mean, Nixon is hard to beat, but I think Trump's really working on trying to get to the point to disavow the Constitution.
Yeah, Bill always wears the scarf. Jason Michelle was just noting. I'm going to put Michelle. Jason, look at what we can do now. Chris Hanley, good day, pastors.
Good day.
Now we got another comment here. Look, here's another
Scarf.
comment.
Yeah, I mean it's cold here. I think are you in Florida? Did I see that on Facebook?
He is, I think, in Florida.
Yeah.
Chris Hanley, though, is right around here. So
Hi, Chris.
hello, Joan. See, I can put those comments up there.
Yeah, that's nice. We can see
There
that.
we go.
Yeah.
And now
Hope you're having a nice time in Florida, Jason.
You can also get rid of them. Boom. Just like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting, though.
By the way, this is medicine.
Yeah, there you go. This is the
rye.
rye.
Yeah, it helps it. Yeah,
It's
it
Jim
helped
Beam
my
rye.
throat. Yeah.
What's interesting, I think, is that So somebody this morning was saying on the what's in the glass? Somebody's saying. Let's put that comment up there. This is Jim Beam rye.
Yeah, it is 5 o'clock in Iceland right now.
Exactly. So it's Friday Night Lights Happy Hour edition.
Yes. Yeah.
I think they had a Morning Joe this morning who was a former FBI guy who's like the only one on the panel that has actually applied for a FISA warrant.
Right.
He said it's the last thing you want to do professionally because it takes a whole month of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying that basically you just there's so much work. Anything can be medicine if you add honey to it. This is true.
That's good insight. That's good homeopathic insight.
Absolutely. But he was just saying that there are so many checks and balances from every side of the.
This is one of the most cynical things, and I've seen a lot of cynical things in my lifetime. This may be one of the most politically cynical things that I have seen, and and may they reap what they sow.
Do you think this trades on just thinking American people are stupid and that they won't really
or that again it gets back to I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and be okay. I think he feels he is bulletproof.
Well, we'll see. I'm really sure.
Yeah.
Although even Trey Dowdy tweeted out today that this in no way affects the Mueller the integrity of the Mueller.
No, it doesn't.
So the fact that a guy like Trey Dowdy said that.
Yeah. No, it's smoke and mirrors. It's an act of desperation. I just think,
you know what Trey Dowdy has that a lot of these guys don't? He's been a prosecutor.
There we go.
So he understands the process.
Yep.
And he understands screwing around with.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully there are people that are still not above the law. We shall see. But, yeah, I'm teaching through Revelation on Wednesday night, and it was just helpful to remind everybody that, even though the Roman Empire didn't quite collapse like St. John the Divine thought it was going to, it still did. So everything must pass, as in the words of the great George Harrison.
This is true. Wait, where are we from? From what song was that?
All Things Must Pass, George Harrison.
I don't know that song.
It's a great song.
You're screwed up when Brother Trey doesn't go along with you. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, Trey Dowdy.
Yeah, there we go.
He's got a very interesting look. His hair, his little goatee. He's not running for re-election either.
Yeah. No.
Devin Nunes isn't.
Yeah, well, he's got a job with Fox already, I think.
I bet you that pays well.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope.
I would work.
I hope
Fox.
he gets what. Oh yeah.
I'd be one of those people on the panel that they just pick on. I'm sure that's a great paycheck, like Juan Williams on the 5. I'm sure you make great money.
Like that time you were on Howard Stern, he picked on you.
Exactly.
It made me mad.
Exactly. I take it all the way to the bank.
All right. Well, anyway.
So.
But by the way, I just saw, a woman in her 30s died from this flu. It was really bad. And I appreciate the other night you called me because Lindy was worried about
I called to ask about like Bill's
post
about his coughing and stuff because she
about
was
my weakened lungs.
she was worried about your lungs.
Well, yeah, my luck, I would die at the Hotel California. For those of you who don't know, I'm living in a hotel because of water damage from burst pipes, and you can check in, but you can never leave.
Never check out.
It's
just a man.
Yeah,
the hotel. And his
Don
cognac.
Henley just keeps roaming the halls. That's not a good sign.
This is a memoir waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So the other thing, by the way, I almost called this morning because I was.
Oh, I knew Don McKim.
Yeah, Don McKim. Yeah, Don McKim's a nice guy.
He is a nice guy.
I switched for a second to Fox and Friends, which I almost never do in the morning.
I'm not watching anything, by the way, on TV.
That's like a Lenten discipline.
Yeah, well, just for my own sanity.
So I turned over and I was like, I wonder what the rap is here. So the rap was that, well, Nunez actually, is a man of integrity that's actually not doing what everybody in Washington would normally do, just leak it. You leak it and just do that. He's actually going through the process. Like, looking at him, it's like, man for our times. It's just great.
He is the worst.
Chris Hanley says the idea of universal truth has been lost. Bias and differing worldviews are no longer just assumed, but they are embraced justification for creating alternative truths and identity wars. I think that's true.
Yeah, but don't worry, Chris. The whole thing's going to collapse. The whole civilization's going to collapse. And then, we'll have some dark ages and some dystopia things going on. And maybe a few books will survive, and, we'll start over.
There you go.
There we are. That's kind of it. You realize,
another folk song by Bill Bohr.
The world is ending, it's the eve of destruction. I didn't write that.
I love that song.
I know. I think I introduced that song to you.
Yeah, I love that song.
Yeah, Barry McGuire. Yeah.
So we're going to talk today not about that, though. We're going to talk a little bit about Luther and the dark side.
The dark side of Luther.
The dark side of Luther.
For all you people who've uncritically jumped into the Luther bandwagon, we're here to deliver you.
There you go. So we're going to talk about the dark side of the moon, or the dark side of Luther.
Or both.
Or both.
Yeah. A little Pink Floyd. We're doing a lot of rock and roll kind of.
A lot of rock and roll things. Look at all these comments we've got. Look at Tier. Look what I can do now. I can use this eCam to just put your comments up there. Bill Bohr really knows how to cheer up the. Oh yeah, no, Bill. This is positive, Bill. Though I mean, what you're getting here is like
pretty happy right
exactly. Now. This is Bill on an upside. I mean, you ought to see Bill sometimes on his.
Well, look. Yeah, what do I read? Like, what do I read for? I read like what Holocaust poetry.
Yeah. Sometimes you tell me what you're doing. Like,
yeah, but
wow, okay.
But look at the good side here. If I'm wrong, then everything could be better.
It's like,
by the way, I'm not. But go ahead.
It's like what the Republicans didn't do with this memo. What you do with the memo, what you should do is, low expectations and over deliver, right? Like lower expectations and over deliver.
But they did the opposite.
They raised expectations and delivered nothing. See what you're doing, it's you're preparing us for the worst, and if it gets better, then we're better.
Right. Or it's kind of, speaking of Luther, it's like when Landgrave Hess was trying to get him to settle with the reformers. He goes, maybe we'll just all be martyrs.
Hey, these things happen.
These things do happen.
All right, I'm going to start recording.
All right.
Here we go. So, here we go. Make sure we're on 2 tracks. Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I'm Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr.
And here we are, Bill, in the bunker yet again.
Friday. I feel like we're maybe back to be ready in our own kind of cycle. I know I've been sick and, I was going to say disembodied.
You've convalesced.
Yeah, I've been convalescing. I'm homeless. A couple things. Yeah, so I've not been the best partner in this marriage.
Hey, well,
of late. But I appreciate you.
We're here.
You're hanging in there, being true to your vows, and
we're here for you.
Thank you. Yeah, and your wife looks out for me. I like that.
She does.
She cares about. I care about her.
She's very easy to care about.
Yeah, she's good. She's a great person.
So, Bill, today you've chosen our topic du jour.
Yeah, because a couple things. I am currently teaching church history too, and And we've been kicking around doing a series, kind of our own, new persuasive words take on the 500th anniversary of the beginning of the Reformation.
And we did a little bit on with through Garish and Jensen a little bit.
No, we did. I think a very interesting analysis. Well, it was interesting to you and me and a few Sunday school classes. I think.
People actually bought the books.
Wow, but
so we should get a commission for that.
But
I would think.
again, I think I mean there are certain circles that we actually are close to and sympathetic to, that and many have kind of become neo-Lutherans, whatever you want to say. They're kind of looking through Lutheran lenses as they, kind of. I think it's an interesting kind of
which we want to make a distinguishing. We want to distinguish right between Luther's lenses and Lutheran lenses, because those could be very two different things.
All right, well, just help me decide.
Well, I just mean, like, it's one thing to. This is the whole sort of Calvin versus the Calvinist debate,
right.
where you could,
all right, very good.
where you could say, like, a lot of Calvin scholarship would say that people read Calvin through a sort of scholastic tradition or a
Right.
Westminster tradition,
Some do. Some do.
find
Yeah.
and so you wind up with this Calvin versus the Calvinist sort of debate. Is Calvin, how much continuity and discontinuity are there? People like Ed Dowie have been.
Yeah.
My teacher Charles Partee. A lot of these.
I
people.
actually was in Ed Dowie's last lectures on Calvin.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of he was struggling with Parkinson's, but it still was some very great. It was a great class.
And on the other side of that debate, you have people like Richard Muller, right? Who was that? I mean, he's, I guess, an OPC or PCA guy or something, but a distinguished Calvin scholar, but very much sees lots of continuity between Calvin and the kind of scholastic tradition, where others, like mainline confessional scholars, tend to see more distance.
Yeah, well, and I think we try it. Well, people that we stand in their tradition, and it's a living tradition. I do think, we try to appropriate the people we admire in the best possible light. I think so. It's hard to be, it was interesting when the whole kind of when people discovered that Bart, had an unusual relationship with his secretary. I mean, it's funny that. Well, I mean, again, I don't mean to be making fun, but I thought everybody knew that.
Yeah, exactly. That was not a shocker.
It's like when they discovered the Gospel of James. Well, no, they didn't discover it. I read that in seminary.
Well, also, I think people I think there was a kind of Pollyannish take on it out there that and then there were some letters that came out that were published and analyzed that Bart had written, and I mean, people. Well, I think people imagined it was more chastened than it was, or something.
I think. Well, Bart is Bart saved mainline Protestants in one particular way, and then when you have more conservative Reformed people embracing him and discovering him, he takes on a different kind of, almost a different kind of iconology. I mean, I do think, one of the things, whether you want to describe it, evangelicals or more traditional Protestants. There is a sense that because, particularly if you no longer hold on to an inerrant scripture, you're always looking for something that you can kind of bet on. I mean, that was when I was at Drew. The Odinites were funny. I mean, I can still remember questioning.
And when you're talking about, you're not talking about people that are worshiping the father of Thor.
No, we're talking about the people that were followers of Tom Odin of blessed memory, and. I remember just saying, boy, this is really kind of a strange thought in the Cappadocians in a seminar one time. And oh my gosh, it was like I had stepped on an icon of Jesus. I mean, one of Odin's people were like, oh my gosh, how could you even question Gregory of Nyssa? I said, well, he just said something pretty strange there. But I think that one of the things, in reevaluating Luther, and one of the things every time I do these lectures, I always try to read something new and I've been reading some letters of Luther and things around him, and I probably, most of the time, if you have to pick between the Lutheran strain and the Calvin strain, I probably end up a little more in the Lutheran strain. I mean, I wouldn't fully embrace either of those strains, but I enjoy Luther. I appreciate him. I said, I'd rather read one page of Luther than 50 of Calvin. But Luther frequently was an awful human being. And I think that part of the problem with sanitizing that is that, I think when you're evaluating someone's thought, you have to look at the whole. And I do think that the narrowness of justification by faith alone and his unwillingness to even give an inch anywhere, became a weapon not only against his Catholic opponents, but more tragically against those who, in many ways, were inspired by his very words. I mean, I think his behavior at the Marburg gathering is just there's just no excuse for it, and his comments about it when Zwingli was killed, his comments about the peasants who took his words. And again, we may do a whole episode on Luther and the Jews, but that is, you can't merely say, all right, well, that was a medieval legacy. Yes. But the fact is the impact of his thinking had dire consequences far beyond his own time. And so I think it's interesting that, in many ways, Martin, we talked about, and this is, you can take your point because we talked about this a little bit back and forth earlier today. But, there's in a lot of ways, Martin Luther was acted in many ways antithetical to the Christ he lifted up. And he did it with his thinking as well as his actions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so if justification by faith alone is part of the problem, right?
I do think it is.
I think Torquemada didn't believe in that, and he could be pretty. I mean, I think we can think of. I think we can think of lots of people in the history of the medieval church. So I think to lay
and
that
actually,
legacy.
Torquemada is a good example because he was a very devout guy who did awful things.
Right, but also there's a difference between so. Say that people are hypocritical and inconsistent, or that's one thing. To say that well, if you do a synergistic kind of view or have faith, something that adds a sort of more traditional medieval position on salvation or something. Lots of shitty things were done by people that didn't. But I think that
again, I mean, someone of a much better character, I think, like someone like Thomas More, also advocated for there to be. He thought heretics should be executed, because that was even more dangerous than a capital crime. So, yeah, I think you have to, again, I don't...
What is our position on that?
Depends on the heretic.
What do you think about congressmen?
I think capital punishment should be brought back. Okay. I've got my list when the revolution happened. My trouble is, I've been one of those French revolutionaries who helped persuade people, and I would have been the first one that cut their head off. That's my trouble with, I agree with Simone Weil. Religion isn't the opium of the masses. Revolution is, or change maybe.
Yeah.
In our country, make America great again is the opium of the masses right now. But no, and again, I you and I really do think over the years I've defended Luther and have defended many historical figures, saying you have to judge them by their own times. But you compare his temperament to Bucer, or to Staupitz, or to Melanchthon, or Michael Satter, who was one was a really lovely soul, ended up being burned at the stake for his convictions as an Anabaptist. Luther condemned those guys who were actually taking some of Luther's very thoughts to his logical conclusions. So I think it's important to lift that up, because I think particularly this kind of weird merger. And again, there's some real benefit to it, but this merger of kind of a modern psychological analysis with a Lutheran perspective that a lot of people are embracing, I think, and sometimes uncritically, I think sometimes it allows them to justify doing some things that are pretty lousy. And so I think Luther can be instructive to us in saying that, okay, for all his courage, and he was a remarkably courageous guy, and for all his genuine struggle and for his contributions, the shadow side is part of the story, which is true of all of us. And it doesn't help us to deny our shadow side either, or justify it or rationalize it.
Yeah, I would say, I think that Luther and the complicated biography, and certainly somebody who is a tortured soul a little bit, I think I would want to distinguishing that and the reception of his thinking, which is always filtered through centuries of interpretation. I mean, it's interesting. You just think of the Luthers, like he's in his own time, he's the the person that's recovered the dormant faith or hidden faith from, the Orthodox and Catholic, the generation, and the subsequent generation. He winds up being the guy that discovered, when the Orthodoxy is kind of scholasticism, he winds up becoming the person that taught all these great doctrines. For the pietists, he's the great interior man of faith. For he
could be for some he is the champion of the worker. For other, he epitomizes all that's wrong with the bourgeoisie.
Absolutely. So I think that to say like his own sort of angry polemics and things like that, to say that those things, to then draw a line to reception, I'm just really skeptical about.
But don't you think it's part of that? It merely from a critical scholarly perspective, don't you think that you have to look at that stuff as well? That's part.
Oh yeah, of course. I think that absolutely.
And don't you have to ask is some of the core flaws and not again a character flaw, but in how he applied his doctrine? Isn't it right to ask, is there something inherently wrong with the doctrine? I mean, you can talk about the person, but can't you also ask the question, is there something in the thinking that allows him to go this direction as well? I'm just asking that question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can ask that, but I think again, I would be skeptical of being able to make one-to-one connections or causal effect either in Luther's time or our own.
Right, no, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying the question needs to be raised. It's part of the whole story. For instance, I wish Augustine didn't write the last 2 years of his life. Okay, that's I think some of his most regrettable things he wrote are in those last couple of years of his life. But I think. I think that's part of the story. I can't remember. I think it's one of the books that was lost in the flood. Is it Baynard's biography? What's that kind of famous Luther biography, Here I Stand?
Oh yeah, Roland Baton. He's the guy that wrote the book on Christian pastors.
I think it's in Roland Baton. He says that. I remember because that was one of the. I read that years ago. What says it's unfortunate that Luther lived beyond 1530. Now, I think the content of Luther's doctrine lead him in that direction, but his consciousness did.
That comes from Matt Tebbe via Facebook live stream.
All right. Well, if you're channeling Martin, good for you. Yeah. But I think, I don't think that's, I don't want to do that either. I don't want to say I wish Luther would have been dead in 1530. I think he wasn't. And
second half of 15th century.
And I think I like some of the stuff he wrote in his 30s. But again, you read what he wrote about the Jews in like 1524, and then the Jews in their lives, what was written, I guess, in the 1530s. It's a very unfortunate change of perspective, and I think that's part of the story. And so, I do think that it's part of why we shouldn't be any ist or ins. In other words, Luther didn't want a Lutheran, Calvin didn't want a Calvinist, partially because, again, I think this is a Protestant principle, but going back to the Word of God as a way of, assessing people's teachings and what they say in their life. And I think that to me, the shadow side of Luther is part of the story, and not to look at it and not to view his thinking through that shadow, I think is something that ultimately disserves us, particularly if we're trying to take the best of his insights and apply them, in our current time. I think same things. You could say the same thing of Barth. You could say the same thing with Bonhoeffer. For instance, the Bonhoeffer project, in many ways, is unfortunate because he didn't live long enough to finish some of his thinking. And so, it's almost unfair to say, well, this is what Bonhoeffer would have come up with. I think, particularly in the unfinished stuff like his ethics, which I think are some amazing things in there. But, to say, well, this is what he would have done or whatever. And Same thing with Paul Tillich. You can't talk about Tillich apart from, some of his shenanigans or from the trauma that he experienced as a chaplain in World War I. So I think all of that is part of the story.
Oh, sure. I agree with that. I mean, I think that's. Although when I read The Courage to Be, I think very little about Paul Tillich's biography.
Well, I know. Again, for me, and the same thing too. I mean, I can, as much as, particularly, I've done a lot of work with the Jewish community and Jewish-Christian dialogue. What Luther says in that doesn't mean I don't read him anymore. The same thing with John Chrysostom. I think, John Chrysostom may be the reason there's purgatory for what he said about the Jews. But also when you want to talk about a prophetic voice about the care for the poor and, those kind of things, John Chrysostom, that doesn't prevent me from reading John Chrysostom. So I just think as both a historian, as someone who, what drove me to church history was looking for teachers and mentors. I mean, that really is more than just merely an academic interest. I think, I found myself at Princeton wanting to, I needed to know more. I needed to know more about the faith, and particularly as a pastor who cared about thinking, I wanted to read people who were great at both. So, I mean, for me, hardly anything being written now theologically. I mean, there's very few things that are worth reading if you haven't read some of these other stuff first. But that, I think, sometimes this kind of we have to temper our enthusiasm for these guys, or most of them guys, but for these folks. And I think in some levels it ultimately allows us to maybe appreciate them more because of their flaws and their humanity, but not to deny those flaws that are there. And that had horrendous implications for in some. I mean, in some levels, the bigger the influence, the bigger the footprint they left, the greater possibility for damage to be done as well. And Luther's not accountable for what people did with his works, but again, I think you and I, when we went back and forth earlier today, yes, I think we need to judge him as time as a late medieval person. You can't be in any other time than you are. If you're not where you're at, you're nowhere. And certainly you and I are shaped the same way by our times. But you can compare him to his peers. You compare him to Staupitz and Melanchthon. And I would say both of those folks often showed more prudence and more Christian charity than he did.
Yeah, I mean, again, in his own context, he might have been on the prickly side.
Well, I think the danger of Luther is a danger to all of us. When we come to a particular insight that's born out of our experience. Matter of fact, you could talk about Zwingli too. Zwingli's kind of almost fatalistic view of providence and predestination is born out of the fact that he got the plague and lived. Okay, I mean, he himself says that. So we have to, on one level, the power, I think, of the incarnation is that these important truths come to, none of us are as significant as Martin Luther, but we all have these kind of moments, these aha moments that are born out of our encounter with God and the gospel and our seeking and our struggling. And those are gifts and formative moments. But I think it's almost, and you preached a sermon on this, it's like the danger of Mark 9, of the Mount of Transfiguration. In some levels, all of us have had those aha Mount Transfiguration moments. The trouble is when we decide to build a tabernacle there and stay there. And I think justification by faith for some people is an idolatry that prevents them from reading the truth of the gospel.
Oh, I'd say, but then what isn't? I mean,
don't. No, the truth is,
I will, and I shall.
I think it's very problematic. Don't defend that because.
Well, no, I would totally defend the doctrine. I wouldn't say that
faith alone. You would defend that
sure.
as a biblical doctrine.
Yeah.
As the New Testament teaches, the way Luther teaches it.
I mean, I think that we could go back and forth if. So, Bill, is there anything you believe that doesn't rise off the pages from a biblicist perspective? Or are there things that?
Oh yeah, no.
I just think that is.
But I think to treat it as an idol is distorting people's.
Well, you know what? To treat that. Well, okay.
And it's been used.
Is there a more vacuous sentence than to treat blank as an idol is a problem. To treat Jessica,
But it is a problem.
To treat MAGA, to treat
it's a problem because
ecology like an idol, to treat anything like an idol.
People are throwing out biblical scholarship in the name of this Lutheran idea, and I think that that's a problem.
Well, I think people also ride. I think that like on any contentious topic, right, that has to do with something in Christian theology, oftentimes exegetical things will be.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely.
I mean,
yeah, no, you're right. I mean,
Paul Barclay, right? This guy who just wrote this book, which I have not yet read yet, but it's like 900 pages called on the gift, and this is, this guy's.
What's it about?
It's about Paul's doctrine of grace, and it's closer towards a kind of Lutheran-ish perspective. He's a British scholar. I mean, I think this stuff always gets settled out, and of course, people are gonna. I think that it was Ritschl that said that we shouldn't do theology by biblical studies first, then history, the exegesis, then systematics, because when we're doing exegesis, we're really just doing history of interpretation of our own tradition anyway. So we should do history of interpretation first, because that's really what we're doing when we're doing exegesis. Then try to see how the Bible speaks that, then come out with constructive
and most
formulations.
good commentators do that.
Yeah,
most good commentators talk about that.
I can think of a lot of commentaries I have that aren't very cognizant of the history or reception of tradition at all.
Well, no, but I'm thinking of the best scholarly commentaries I have on my shelf begin with the history of the interpretation of the book.
Yeah, I can think of tons of series that don't do that at all.
Well, no, but I'm saying the best ones.
Give me an example of the best series uniformly that do that.
Well, no, again, uniform. I mean, you tend to have to pick and choose.
Some good commentators do that. That's different than saying the
well, I think in some levels, there's a devotional value to. There are some commentators that I would never lift up. I would never use in a class. If I was teaching a particular class on this, if I was teaching class on Romans, there's certain commentaries I would never use, but that I find personally devotionally beneficial. So I think it's the thing about it is, the most profound Bible teacher I ever knew was my grandmother, who couldn't write beyond a fourth grade education because that's all she had. But there was something about the way she embodied the text that to this day, there's nothing that I have found has invalidated that. So I don't want to say there's not value in devotional commentaries or purely theological commentaries. And sometimes, I think Calvin's commentaries on the Psalms are amazing. I think everyone should have those on their shelves. Now, if I was teaching a seminary class on the Psalms, well, I was going to start to say I might not have them, but I would probably have them in my supplementary bibliography, because sometimes you can be studying the Psalm and you can forget this is a prayer of the Second Temple, which has been a prayer of the church and prayer certainly it was the prayer book of the Reformation. And I think that's one of the things we've lost. That's not good. Now, certainly I want to grant you. In other words, even my critique is a provisional one. I understand that my very critique of this is built on all the things that I both have learned and I'm reacting against. But getting back to that, I just think that iron sharpens iron, and I think to fully appreciate Brother Luther, who I do, and I love reading Luther and love to teach Martin Luther. I just think that it behooves us to ask critical questions.
I absolutely agree. What I'm saying is I think the critical biographical questions are different from the how much did the cause-effect questions of theology to his own, lack of Christian charity in certain instances, to also what the effect of something like justification by faith alone, which is so filtered through centuries of interpretation and popular piety. I just think that to act like that this is something you could just lump together, that's exceedingly complex. Like how you connect those dots.
It is complex,
and
but you can't give them a pass.
I don't give them a pass.
You need to ask the question: is there a connection between how we think and how we live?
Sure.
I think there is.
Sure. Yeah, sure. But the question is, it's a different question to say how Luther thought and how he lived, how I think and how I live. I mean, those are, and to assume that I could go back and figure out causally. Well, no, I think it's tough even in our own biography, or even with contemporaries. It can be tough to find that with chicken and the egg questions on that stuff. And
But we do it all the time. I mean, we sit in spiritual direction therapy, and we do it all the time. Again, I'm always skeptical. Again, I'm skeptical of my own opinions as well as here is the rubric by which.
Which of your opinions are you skeptical about?
I'm skeptical about my positions on scripture or on ordination. Skeptical.
Okay, so those are two things I can think of from talking to you a lot, where you don't have real formulated opinions on that. You're fuzzy on that. Now, that doesn't mean you're skeptical of it.
I'm skeptical of my own fuzziness.
Okay, well, that could be.
And again, I'm sacramental. You know, it's interesting because I lean temperamentally towards Luther's sacramental theology, but then he just kind of made something up. I mean, sometimes I like the idea that, well, we'll just call it
he's making up that, right? I mean, this is in Jensen has an essay about Luther appropriation, and he says four things. Like, one is the communication of the attributes in Christology. So in some ways, he is kind of innovative here, but it's because he thinks there's a problem in the tradition with natures. They're really, and so he's not. It's not he's just making up here to solve the problem. He's trying to think radically Christologically and overcome a problem in the tradition. Now, we could argue about whether he overcame it or whether it's really a problem that needs overcoming. But on that point,
but I want to say I'm attracted to his solution. But I also, I mean, it's a novelty. Is it an innovation? It's interesting. I mean, this could be a different podcast because I think, sometimes someone like Don Scotus Erigunia or Bonaventure, some of this kind of Franciscan mystical approach to the incarnation. That part of. I mean, there may be an intuition that Luther taps into there that's present in the tradition in other places, and he explicitly says it. All I'm saying is that. That's just one of the many ways I'm attracted to some of Luther's unique. I mean, on one level, it gets down to, for him, the Mass was incredibly meaningful, and the encounter of the living Christ in it was incredibly meaningful. And for a lot of reasons, he had to reject what he thought was the scholastic position. But, and there was a book written about this. It was about Calvin and Aquinas. But it'd be interesting if Calvin, Luther, and Aquinas, throw who else you want to in a room, were put in a room, and they all had the same cosmology and worldview. Would they might talk alike about the sacrament? We don't know that.
Well, I mean, for Calvin, like Aquinas, the local presence is really important. For Luther, and again, both of them, I think about the natures,
right,
the human and divine, in ways that, like, the divine nature does certain things, the human nature does other things. In a way that Luther wants to say that wherever Christ is, the whole Christ is there, and
and he's driven by he just the text. This is my body.
Yeah. I think some of the and again, there are good critiques of those Christological moves, but I think
his Christocentrism has always been very attractive.
And someone like Jensen, I think, is trying to.
And that's
follow on some of those moves,
and that's why Jensen is my favorite. Well, most recently deceased theologian. He was our favorite living theologian until he went on to his reward. Well, didn't necessarily solve anything today, but it was. It's good to be alive.
And I just want to say,
it's good to be alive.
I just want to say, I'm not backing down on when you say don't. I did. I
know,
will.
I know.
I shall.
I know. I tapped into. Yeah, we tapped into something there, but that's okay. It's fun for us to fight a little bit.
I'm not. It's just I'm just.
I know
saying.
you won't back down. You're Tom Petty.
I am Tom Petty. All right. Good day out.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye now. Thank you, friends.
Thank you for listening.
It's we had a lot of people listening to it.
Good.
Tuning in.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, gang.
And go read your Luther.
Exactly, or whatever alternative.
No, I think it's it's not a bad thing for people rediscovering Luther to read
Exactly.
Luther. Yeah.
No,
All right.
absolutely.
Peace.